This is Distant Replay. It's time for another documentary recap here on Distant Replay. We do it every week. We pick out a good documentary to go back to, watch, and then share our thoughts, recap it, and share the things we learned along the way. Today we picked out one of the best football players of all time, Barry Sanders. He was a guy that I grew up by just idolizing. I mean, there was a few guys that I grew up in that era in the 80s, 90s. Bo Jackson was a guy that I think kind of transcended the sport. And then I think Barry Sanders, for a lot of guys, especially smaller guys, right, that had dreams of being professional athletes, he's a guy you could look up to. But the way he played was just incredible to watch.
He's one of those athletes where if you just flip a highlight reel on, you could sit there and watch it and be mesmerized by it. There's athletes like that in every sport, and Barry Sanders is it for football, one of the top guys I think of, and just handled everything with absolute class.
Pretty sure when I played video games growing up, like football video games, I would run like him, where I'd run one way and then like do a complete reverse, go all the way back over to the other side of the field and try to outrun the defense, like the way he played. But like you would always try to model yourself after him and what he did. I don't think there's been really anybody else like him either.
Oh, there definitely has not been anyone like Barry Sanders with his running style.
Yeah.
Even just his actual physical running style, where it looked like he was galloping.
Right. Yeah.
He's just, everything about him was completely unique. His size, his speed, his shiftiness, the way he ran, everything.
Well, the documentary is called A Football Life. It is Barry Sanders, and it's about 45 minutes on the life of Barry Sanders, the career of Barry Sanders, football, all pretty much football-related stuff. And we're going to jump into it and start with, really his early on, his upbringing. And, his father, I don't know, I guess I just really didn't pay much attention to it because we were younger, Mike, but I didn't realize the relationship he had with his father, number one, and how tough his father was on him. He was always at games and everywhere, but it just seemed like he just never gave Barry a ton of credit. Like, just essentially, like, I'm going to keep pushing him because I know he can be great, but the compliments were few and far between.
Yeah, he just seemed like an old school guy who didn't hand out many compliments. And you got to remember, Barry Sanders was one of 10 children. So William Sanders had 10 kids, seemed to treat them all pretty fairly. And what I mean by that is he just was brutally honest with them and held them to a high standard. And I think it played a huge role, you find out in this documentary, how Barry Sanders ended up. I think his humility, his humbleness, I think it comes from growing up like that.
Yeah, it does. And I think I actually think he might have had 10 brothers and sisters. I don't remember, but they were talking about being stuck in, like, all stuffed in a house together. And it always blows my mind seeing kids in the 60s, 70s that would grow up in like small houses and just had a bunch of brothers and sisters. We don't see as big of families these days, but it's amazing to me that to live that lifestyle, because we're all very fortunate now that we have larger homes, smaller families. In many cases, you don't have as many 6, 7, 8 person families anymore. But Barry said he'd spend most of his time outside anyway, which that would be few and far between these days because most kids stay inside and enjoy that screen time.
Yeah, and it's even that, like even him, like, yeah, we grew up in a small house. I had 10 brothers and sisters, but I was outside anyway. It was okay.
Yeah.
Like everything's just okay with Barry Sanders,
Yeah, everything's fine. He doesn't want any of the limelight at all, but. It was a tough upbringing, but he was obviously very talented. They showed a clip of him, and I don't know what age, probably like 9 or 10, and he was just destroying the competition. But he ran so smooth, like he ran. He looked like a miniature, college player, like the way he ran. Like most kids are a little awkward, right? They're fast, but they trying to put it all together looks a little odd. But he ran so smooth even from an early age.
Yeah, effortless. Maybe the size wasn't there, but the speed and the grace at which he ran was always there.
Now, at high school, I thought this was pretty cool. I don't really know the story as much about, Barry growing up and how he was recruited, but, his high school coach originally, he's from Wichita. High school coach originally didn't think he was tough enough to play running back, so put him at defensive back, and he played his first 3 years at defensive back, which is astounding that, that he I guess he probably approached it as, hey, whatever coach needs, I'm going to do it. His dad, on the other hand, was like, you should be playing running back. You're much better than everybody else out there. But it finally took that coach getting fired, a new coach coming in to get that shot at running back. And I can't imagine how things would have turned out had that coach not come in.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, William Sanders was known for being hard on Barry Sanders, as we find out in this documentary. But there were times where Barry needed someone to have his back, and Barry wasn't that outspoken. And his dad was there for him at every turn, And it started out when he was in high school, like you mentioned. and that they had his coach, the coach who turned, who made him running back. He was in this Football Life episode, and he was like shocked, like how could this kid not be the running back? You know what I mean? Just completely shocked. I thought that was a cool moment.
Well, a couple things from high school too. He decided he wanted to get that scholarship to college, and told his dad, "Hey, I'm going to spend the summer before my senior year just paying attention to working out." Right? I think most parents would be like, "Okay, I support that. Like, I want you to do kind of chase your dreams, but also, want you to be in a good position for a scholarship." His dad was like, "Okay, that's fine, but you're working out with me, roofing and doing all this kind of blue collar labor around the house and around the yard and neighborhood and stuff." And I think that just kind of played into who he was and how tough he was, because, dude, I can't imagine working outside in the sun constantly. And I'm sure these weren't 3 or 4 hour days, I'm sure, Mike.
No, look, man, I don't know if you've ever, I don't know if I've ever told you this, Ben, but I worked for a roofer one summer. That is not easy work. And especially, when you're a kid like Barry Sanders, who clearly was good at other stuff and could have been pursuing other things. I was not in that situation. I was like, that was the best thing I had to do at the time was roof, But but hey, look, it taught him a work ethic, right? And that was probably the lesson behind the madness of William Sanders. Always doing things to teach his kids these little lessons along the way.
And the other cool thing about college or about high school that kind of foreshadowed how his career would go is he had a chance to win the rushing title in the city his senior year, and I think he finished 40 or 50 yards behind some other guy in another school. But his coach gave him the opportunity, "Hey, do you want to play and try to break this record and have the record?" And he said, "Nah, put the young kids and let them play." He never chased those records. And I think that's why also so many people admired him and pulled for him, because he was not all about himself, right? He was very, very humble, very down to earth. You could connect with him, and he never tried to get that limelight. You pull for a guy like that doesn't want the attention, because how good they are. You want them to be successful.
Yeah, first of all, imagine being that kid, that newspaper clipping they showed with the kid who beat out Barry Sanders for the Wichita rushing title.
Yeah.
He must save that and talk to everyone about it, to this day. You know what I mean? That's a cool moment for that guy. And also, just Barry Sanders have a sense of the moment. When you're a young kid on a varsity football team, you get to play, you get to play in a game where your team's blowing the other team out. That's like your Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And for Barry Sanders at that young of an age to recognize what playing in that game would mean for those kids, it just kind of shows that it really encapsulates, like you said, the guy he is and a foreshadow to the man he would become.
So college rolls around, and his dad's a huge Oklahoma fan, and of course we know Barry went to Oklahoma State. But I always had this internal debate. Now you're not a big college guy, so I don't know that you've ever really thought about this too much. But for me, I'm an Alabama guy. My wife's a North Carolina graduate. We always had a discussion what would you do if your child wanted to go to your rival school, right? Duke. I mean, you're talking about two of the biggest rivalries, so it's easy for us to talk about Oklahoma State. Oklahoma is another very passionate rivalry. What would your approach be to that? And I've always said, if you get a scholarship, I'm going to pull for that school while you're there and pull for your team. They're paying for it, but I'm probably not going to pay for you to go to school there. If that's what you want to do, okay, you can go for it and you can pay for it. So I kind of got where his dad came from about kind of being upset about it. But it did seem like he kind of he kind of got past it and did support his son while he was there, but probably still the same way I would probably approach it. I'd still be pulling for my team overall, but just pulling for my son as well.
I think William Sanders kind of took it to the next level there, though, Ben. There's disagreeing with someone, and then there's when the coach comes to sign your son, you walk out of the house in disgust and say he's making a mistake. Yeah. Because he didn't want Barry to go to Oklahoma State and sit behind Thurman Thomas. I think it was that along with going to the rival. I think it was a combo of both. And also, Barry Sanders gave his parents his Heisman Trophy, and his dad had the Heisman Trophy in back of his Oklahoma helmet in his house.
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
So he had the Oklahoma helmet on the front of the mantle and Barry's Heisman Trophy from Oklahoma State in back of it. So, there's disagreeing with where your kid's going to school, and there's taking it to that level.
I agree. That's a little over the top. That part of it definitely is. But either way, I mean, if you have that kind of tie to college, you probably kind of got a sense of where he was coming from in that. But maybe he was a little too aggressive in that approach, but it didn't matter because Barry got a scholarship and he was ready to go. And again, I mean, when you think of Thurman and Barry in the backfield, that has to be – I was trying to think back to like the all-time backfields, but that's got to be a top 5 college backfield of all time, right?
Oh, of course.
I mean,
and the fact that Barry Sanders was relegated to be a kick returner is hilarious. And a really good kick returner, you know? So added to the list of things he was great at. And Barry Switzer's quote when Barry Sanders was the backup running back at Oklahoma State, and he told his team, don't hurt Thurman. Because that would mean now that the young Barry Sanders would have to be the running back. I think it took Thurman Thomas aback because he was in this documentary. He was like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And the funniest thing was that's the one time like he got his dad's attention where his dad was like flattered that Barry Switzer, who was a god in his house, was complimenting his son. You know?
Yeah, I thought that quote was crazy. The fact that he recognized the talent that much, and I mean Thurman is we know who Thurman is, right? And you were saying don't hurt him because the guy that's a freshman behind him is actually better. That's crazy to think about, and you know that's why Barry Switzer was so good to recognize that as well. But he basically had one outstanding year in college. Barry did, and I'd forgotten kind of how good it was. 2,600 yards rushing in the regular season. They didn't count the bowl game for official NCAA totals, Mike, but he finished the year with the bowl game included. 373 carries for 2,850 yards rushing. 2,800 yards rushing in 12 games in college. Almost 8 yards a carry, 237 yards per game, and he had 42 touchdowns rushing.
Unreal. So, I mean, Ben, we've had some eye-popping statistical seasons in college football lately where when the offense has pretty much gotten out of control here.
Yeah.
Has there been a season that's rivaled that?
Dude, he broke 34 Division I records in college. 34 records.
I mean, you look at like when Tim Tebow or Cam Newton or Justin Fields lately, you know, when they have good seasons, they're totaling around 50 touchdowns, and that's passing and running. Yeah. He had 42 just running.
Yeah, it's incredible, those numbers. I mean, it truly is. What he was able to do was wild. And you know, to your point, you know, Joe Burrow, his incredible year, which was actually outdone a little bit by Mac Jones in Alabama the next year, but LSU that senior year he threw for 60 touchdowns. So, and that was one of the all-time great seasons. 15 games total. I mean, give Barry Sanders 3 more games. What does he do, Mike? You don't think he's going to get 10 more touchdowns, 15 more touchdowns in 3 games?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, just unbelievable. I had forgotten how eye-popping the stats were, but when they're, because it's funny because when they talk about these great college seasons historically, he gets brought up, but not as prominent as he should be.
Yeah, he still holds that record. There's only been a total of 35 guys that have rushed for 2,000 yards in college football history, but he still holds that record. But he did win the Heisman, and I didn't remember this, but he was in Tokyo for the Heisman Trophy presentation. They had him on TV, a satellite feed coming in from Tokyo. And I could not remember, but we went back and researched it. He played in the Tokyo Bowl against Texas Tech in the final game of the season, so they weren't there for the Heisman Trophy. Who scheduled that?
Yeah, I don't know how far Texas Tech and Oklahoma State are from each other geographically, but the fact that those two teams both went to Tokyo to play a football game is comical in itself. And this is the one thing we talked about pre-show, Ben, like why the heck was he in Japan? Yeah. And we looked it up to see who was in the Tokyo Bowl, which is funny. And you want to tell everyone who his quarterback was in that game?
Mike Gundy was his quarterback. I had no idea. Yeah. Like, you think that would be well known, like Mike. Maybe it is. Maybe we're idiots. But Mike Gundy and Barry Sanders in the same backfield. I guess I just didn't realize that. But Barry went for 332 yards and 4 touchdowns in that game. It was a classic Big 12 matchup, 45-42. It went for almost 3 hours and 37 minutes, 12 total touchdowns, and one of the longest games in college football history, and the first game ever played at the Tokyo Dome. So pretty remarkable that was the case, and I don't remember that at all. I don't even remember how many Tokyo games there have been, but it's been a while.
I have no idea the last time there was a Tokyo Bowl. Maybe someone could look it up for us.
It's pretty crazy. But he did win the Heisman and then off to the NFL where he was drafted by the Lions and really kind of in a period where, the golden era of Detroit sports, right? The Pistons, what they were, the Red Wings, were good. And then you had the Lions with Barry Sanders. The Lions they hadn't been a good team, good franchise, but Barry changed all that. I mean, that's how good Barry was. Is he made the Lions cool.
Yeah, he made the Lions very cool. He made, for me, watching him play on Thanksgiving in the 90s, him and it happened to be him and Emmitt Smith every Thanksgiving, which I think the NFL lucked out big time in the 90s because of that, and how good the Cowboys were during this period obviously helped. But in general, Barry Sanders, that early Thanksgiving Day game, you made sure you were in your seat to watch Barry Sanders play in the Silverdome. And he's the franchise, the brand, right from word one. We get Wayne Fonts sightings all throughout. This Wayne Fonts and his awesome sweaters he used to wear on the sideline with the old, Detroit Lions written on it with the silver and blue. I think of two guys when I think of the Lions in that era. I think of Wayne Fonts and I think of Barry Sanders. But all kidding aside, this was actually a pretty talented Lions team they had. They had talented receivers. They had obviously Barry Sanders. They had Rodney Peete and Scott Mitchell at quarterback. These teams, I look back at their records, were a lot better than I had remembered.
Yeah.
I use a focus on Barry Sanders, but they were good as a whole. I mean, I'll go through this with you, Ben. 91, they finished 12-4, beat the Cowboys in the divisional round of the playoffs 38-6, and lose to the Redskins 41-10 in the NFC Championship game.
Okay. And before you go further, let me just give you some context because we know Detroit's not a good franchise, right? But that 91 season was their first playoff appearance since 83. And they had only had 3 playoff appearances between 1962 and 1991. 3 playoff appearances and no wins. So this 1991 win is so iconic because it was their only win since 1962 in the playoffs. So we're talking, 29 years, almost 30 years between playoff wins. And now, to this day, Mike, it's 30 more years since they've won a playoff game. They have not won since that day.
Wow.
They've had one playoff win in 60 years, Mike. Think about that.
Yeah, that's incredible. The next time I complain about being a Jets fan, remind me of this.
Think about that.
But, yeah, that is nuts. And remember, the reason why that win is big also is, they're the last team to beat the Cowboys in the playoffs until the Cowboys go on a run and pretty much own the league the next 3 years. So, 92, they go 5-11, the Lions, down year. But in 93, they go 10-6, win the division, losing the first round to the Packers. 94, they go 9-7. Losing the wild card to the Packers. So this is the Lions making the playoffs all these years. 95, they go 10-6, lose to the Eagles in the wild card. 96, they go 5-11, and the slide kind of starts a little bit. And then the first season under Bobby Ross, they go 9-7 and lose the wild card to the Buccaneers. Mm-hmm. So, and then a down year in 98, of course. But and did you know Sylvester Croom was the offensive coordinator in 97 and 98 for the Lions?
No, I didn't remember that, no.
I didn't. Sylvester Croom just showed up on my TV one day coaching Mississippi State. I knew nothing else. I knew nothing else about Sylvester Croom.
He went to Alabama. He was almost Alabama's head coach when Mike Shula got the job.
That's why I mentioned him.
Yeah.
That's why I mentioned
him. But it was crazy to see, like, Ross, he came in and tried to add a fullback in front of Barry. And after 2 games, Barry had 53 yards rushing, I think they said. And that was the year he went on to surpass 2,000 yards with that start. Like, I credit Bobby Ross for making the adjustment and letting him play. But like that, to throw in that fullback and try something different, it's like, hey, I think Barry's doing all right. Let's just keep doing what we're doing here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what a wild move. Bobby Ross is one of those hardo football guys. Like classic. You go from an easy, laid-back coach in Wayne Fonts to like a hardo Bobby Ross, we're going to run the ball between the tackles with the fullback, that crap. And then that didn't last long. He hit 53 yards in the first 2 games and ends up with 2,000 for the season.
2,053. He had 2,000 yards exactly over the final 14 games.
Yeah, and to tie all this together with the Jets, because I have to do it. That last game of the year, okay, where he went over 2,000 against the Jets, right? Very controversial call at the end that kept the Jets from winning and missing the playoffs. Because remember, that was Parcells' first year when the Jets had been terrible, 1-15,
Yeah.
And then this season, terrible call at the end of that game cost the Jets the game.
Hey, man, the Jets were they'd almost bottled him up, but that second half was just too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's Barry Sanders.
What are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
But because of kind of the way things were going, Barry decided to hang it up after just 10 years in the NFL, which caught everybody by surprise because, I mean, listen, he's 2 years off of or really a 1 year removed from a 2,000-yard season, one of the greatest seasons in NFL history, and here he is hanging it up. And I think partly that was because, kind of alluded to this in the documentary some, that, they didn't really put a lot of effort into making that team better around Barry. And how much do you want to keep fighting when people aren't fighting for you too, essentially? And, what was crazy is he sent a fax into the newspaper. I guess the guy, a childhood friend, worked at the newspaper, sent a fax. But if you told
his local newspaper,
yeah, in Wichita,
yeah, not the Detroit
Right.
Free Press.
Yeah. How? I mean, this was only 1999, Mike. This it's not that long ago. But if you tell somebody like, "Hey, you faxed in your retirement letter to a newspaper," like how many kids you think now, like, or what are we even talking about here?
Yeah, exactly.
It's been like 20 years. That's it.
Yeah, and that's the same way Jordan announced he was coming back, right around the same time period.
Yeah,
he sent the fax.
the
that I'm
fax
back.
machine was hot back then.
Yeah, it was. But hey, and go back to what I said before. Now remember, so Sanders has 97 as a 2,000-yard season. They make the playoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has a subpar 98 and he retires 1,500 yards short of Walter Payton, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe he jumped the gun a little bit. I wouldn't say they didn't try to win around him. You know what I mean? I don't know. I had thought these teams were a lot worse leading up to his retirement. If you look at it, they were pretty competitive up until the year before he retired. So I don't know. I go either way on it because I just feel like, we got robbed of some. He still had some good years left,
Oh, yeah. He could easily gone for 3 or 4 more years and been the top back in the league. And 10 years now is a great NFL career, but for a running back, but not then. And he still had so much left in the tank.
Yeah, so it begs. Now it's not my body getting beat up, so I'm not gonna harp on it with Barry Sanders too much. If he felt like it was the right time, then he felt like it was the right time. Oddly enough, William Sanders supported the decision to retire.
Yeah,
so
that was
kind
like
of came full circle. And William Sanders again stuck by his son when a lot of people were criticizing him. So you got to take the perceived bad with William Sanders and sprinkle in some of the good as well. So the question in the early mid late 90s was Emmett versus Barry. Emmett Smith versus Barry Sanders. That debate was one of the sports debates, they would talk about on sports talk radio, and one of the first ones I could remember. I came squarely on the side that Barry Sanders was the better player, but that Emmett lasted longer and happened to be on better teams.
That's a good take. Could you imagine if First Take was around in the 90s?
Yeah. Yeah, Stephen A. Smith just taking the side against Emmett Smith because it's the Cowboys. I could see it.
Yeah, that was quite the argument. And Emmett was in this too and just said, look, we were both great players. I mean,
Yeah, and Emmett's right. It's not Emmett's fault. He went to a more stable organization.
Right.
He had a better offensive line. That's not his fault. He had, he had better players around him, from a skill position standpoint as well. That's not his fault. He shouldn't be penalized for that. But, if you're going to give me one player in their prime, I'm going to take Barry Sanders all day.
I am too. And Emmett was great. But yeah, Barry was legendary. And obviously a Hall of Famer as well. Had a good speech there as well, talking about fielding the punt, how he didn't field one time. His dad asked him why, and he said he didn't want to lose the game for his team. Kind of changed his whole perspective of winning and playing and just giving it your all and let the chips fall where they may. And that's how he always approached it. But I love Barry, man, and he had his son play at Stanford. I remember him coming out of college because he was considering Alabama briefly, but kind of blazed his own path as well with Stanford there. And I'd love to see another Sanders kid come through college football again because, man, he was so incredible.
He was. And, I'm glad the fans were not happy in Detroit when he left, but I'm glad they came around.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, and then Kid Rock, of course, makes an appearance right at the top of this.
No doubt.
A Football Life episode. If it's Detroit, it's contractually obligated to have either Kid Rock, Eminem, or Jerome Bettis. So you have to have one of those three if it's going to be officially Detroit. So it was good to see him. And look, it was great with his kids at the end. The influence of his dad came full circle with his kids. He has a different style with his kids, it seems like, parenting wise, but he's there for them just like his dad was there for him and all throughout his life. So pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Pretty good documentary. And if you watch Barry, if you didn't watch Barry, you'll probably learn something new out of this. I know we did, and it's a great documentary, and it's always great to go back and relive the career of one of the greats that ever did it. And I don't know. I'm sure Mike's NFL will cycle back to the running game again at some point. But where we are right now, the running back is essentially not non-existent, but how many great running backs are there anymore, and how many do you actually care about too much? We got done with the draft that had one running back or two running backs in the first round. That was it.
Yeah, it was Najee and the kid from Clemson.
And then there was questions of whether or not they should have been first round picks. I mean, that's kind of where the game is now. So I don't know that we'll ever get back to that where you have a guy that's dominant or not. Who knows? I mean, Derrick Henry's had some really good seasons, but he seems to be an anomaly, kind of like Barry was, right, during the time. He's just a completely different guy altogether.
Barry was appointment television. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any running backs this day and age that are appointment television.
Yeah, unfortunately. All right, let's close it out, Mike. A Football Life, Barry Sanders. You can find it. It's NFL Films. It's out there. It's on YouTube. Pretty easy watch, 45 minutes, but good documentary. It kind of hits all the major points of Barry's career, and it was great going back and reliving that.
Absolutely. This one was a pleasure. Keep the suggestions coming. Rate, subscribe, review, and until next time.